everyone. Welcome back to Risky Business, our podcast about making better decisions. I'm Maria Konnikova.
I'm Nate Silver.
So today we're going to be doing a little bit of a deep dive into the political situation that is Joe Biden.
People who have not made good fucking decisions. Excuse me. You're already getting like this swearing, beeping. I don't know what they're doing, depending on, if you're listening to this in Saudi Arabia or something, what they do with the swear words. But yeah. Anyway, let's reserve it, Maria, for the actual segment.
Yes, and then we'll be talking about the World Series of Poker. It is currently the main event, and we are taping this right before I go play day 3. I'm running on about 4 hours of sleep, but I'm very excited to be here, Nate, and we're going to get totally psyched up to play by talking about the amazing decisions that the United States political machinery is making.
I got a great night's sleep after having gotten knocked out of the main event on the last level. There is more poker later this week, but good luck to you, Maria.
Thanks so much, Nate. First, let's do a quick recap. So last time we spoke about the elections, it was right after the debate, which I think the scientific consensus was it was a total clusterfuck.
It's an epic shitstorm, I think.
Okay,
is the actual,
perfect.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, total clusterfuck. That's a little less than shitstorm, right?
No, actually, I think you're right. It's a shitstorm inside a black hole, inside a clusterfuck, inside a fucking.
Okay, that sounds reasonable. So that's where we were last time. So now it's been a week and a half later, right? Something like that. 2 weeks later.
Yeah, it's been 12 restless nights since the debate for Joe Biden and the Democrats.
Yes, and things have gone up and down, right? In the immediate aftermath of the debate, it seemed like people were absolutely horrified. And then Joe Biden is now going on his I'm not resigning tour.
Yeah, no, look, the best case scenario for Democrats right now. I mean, first of all, let's talk about look, some commentators, Benji Sarlin's a very bright reporter for Semaphore, and talks about the kind of mutually assured destruction scenario that Biden is presenting for Democrats, right? Where he's saying basically, well, I'm going to be the nominee, whether you like it or not. And so anything you do now will just put me in an even worse position against Trump, right? So first of all, let me state this is actually not Biden's only option. Biden has the right to stand down. The ballots have not been printed yet. That's all misinformation, right? We haven't had the convention yet. By the way, it's actually technically speaking not the Democrats' only option. There is a conscious clause in the convention, which says if you're in your good conscience, you think this guy should not be the nominee, then you are not legally bound to vote for him. Now, 98, 99% of the delegates were people selected by Joe Biden. When you vote in the primaries, you vote both for a candidate and for his or her delegates to the convention as chosen by the candidate, right? So they're loyal to Biden, but they're also weren't really necessarily planned for a scenario like this. There might be regular normie Democrats who are kind of local party leaders. If you look at polling now of Democratic voters, it's actually pretty close. I think in one poll, which was put out by a group that's advocating for this, so take that with a grain of salt, right? In one poll, a majority of Democratic voters actually said they'd prefer to have an open nomination process to Biden. I mean, I don't know what kind of cave people are hiding in, but the concern about Biden's age and the debate is certainly not confined to just elites, right? I mean, it was registered in polls of voters for a long time. For months, for years, voters have said, sorry, we tolerated up to age 81, which he is now, right? But another 6 months,
Right.
plus another 4 years, 86, that's not going to work for us, right? And if you
By
talk
the way,
to
Nate, has that clause ever been used?
I don't think so, but look, no, I mean, it depends because before 1972, roughly, then it was kind of a smoke-filled rooms scenario where parties would have minimal to no input from voters. The primaries were mostly for show, and then they go to convention, actually pick the candidate. It's what the convention was for. Since then there hasn't been a situation where the superdelegates had to be invoked, although it was close in some years, right? Hillary versus Obama was fairly close, for example. There was talk on the Republican side where Trump at one point had a plurality but not a majority of delegates in 2016. He wound up, though, sweeping the last 20% of states to have a clear majority in the end. But look, I mean, the reason you write emergency procedures is for emergencies, and Democrats
Yeah,
are in kind of an
an
emergency.
emergency.
I'm not going to be one of those people who's like, oh, Trump gets elected, it's going to be the last election. I think it's probably hyperbolic, right? But like, one of your goals as a party is to elect winning candidates and win elections. And Joe Biden's probably not going to beat Donald Trump. And in fact, even Democrats, if you read the reporting, even Democrats who say we can't switch candidates, if you talk to them privately, if you talk to them privately, they say, we think Biden's going to lose. We just don't think we have a choice, right? We want to save down ballot races, things like that. It's just not very
Yeah.
rational, I don't think.
No, I mean, and it's a problem that you get in decision making a lot when it's a collective action problem, and you need that one person to step up and to say something and to actually be the person who becomes that voice that says, okay, we need to say publicly what everyone is saying privately. But unless that happens, that galvanizing force can't gain momentum. And so many times then in these decision-making processes, and by the way, right now we're talking about the presidency, which is huge, but this happens in boardrooms, this happens in corporate decision makings, this happens everywhere. When everyone is thinking something privately, but they can't say it publicly because they're too afraid of the repercussions, and the calculus just doesn't work out. If we put it in our game theoretical framework, right, you start
Yeah.
looking at the payoff matrix and you say, okay, what's my payoff matrix if I'm the person who speaks out and then people don't support me and all these things happen and then I'm the one who loses? And Biden is actually playing into that because he's stacking it. He's explicitly saying, okay, your payoff matrix looks like shit because, I'm going to do this, and you don't want to be the person who betrayed me, right? You don't want to be Brutus in this scenario. And
Well, look, I don't think he's going to be president for much longer. I'm not sure he's going to be an influential political figure for much longer or in good health if he is already for much longer, right? Um, Look, I have an article I'm running on. I'll finish for newsletter subscribers after we finish taping this podcast. But I think Biden has a weak hand and is running a pretty bad bluff. And I think people who select to go into politics tend to be what I would call nits, meaning we've used that term before on the show, right?
we
A
have,
nit's like a
yes.
neurotic, risk averse person. And elected Democrats are like neurotic and risk averse and also very people pleasing. You advance in the
Mhm.
party by building alliances and the different constituents and commitments you have, finding ways to balance those, pleasing donors, which sounds like the worst thing in the world to me, right? To have like some rubber chicken
Mhm.
dinner where you're pleasing these donors who are rich but have dumb opinions about politics most of the time. Let's be honest.
Yes,
You
I
know, that
nicknamed
sounds
that
like an
IPO
awful life to
chicken
me.
for initial
IPO
public
chicken.
offer. IPO chicken, because when you go to IPO
Oh,
dinners, they always serve this rubber chicken. So yes, they have IPO chicken dinners.
that life sounds like torture to me. You couldn't fucking pay me enough to be a fucking senator or something like that. However, it selects for people who are not inclined to rock the boat. But look, there are several things here. One is that Biden has clearly the first move was to get Biden to take a hint gently. I mean, the first move is you hope that he kind of is aware of the situation on his own, right? The first move is to get Biden to take the hit gently, and then maybe not so quite so gently where you start to have anonymous leaks, and then you have backbenchers, meaning relatively obscure members of Congress, kind of saying, "Hey, you should think about this." As far as I know, as far as any reporting has suggested, there has not been like a posse of senior leaders who has gone to the White House and said, "Joe, we're not fucking around. You're going to lose. You're going to embarrass your party. You're going to embarrass your position in history. It's time to stand down." So far as I know, that hasn't happened really. They have kind of gone halfway up the escalatory spiral, but they haven't really used their best ammunition yet. Never mind these nuclear options like the Conscious Clause or the 25th Amendment is an amendment to the U.S. Constitution that concerns if a president is unable to carry out his duties and the cabinet can say that the vice president ought to take over. Um, I also think that like they haven't fully played the Kamala Harris card, and I want to talk about Harris in kind of the second half of this segment.
Mhm.
But like, one of the ironies is that the Congressional Black Caucus has been what's helped Biden to save ground, to salvage ground so far, right? I don't think there have been any Congressional Black Caucus members who have come out yet and said that Biden should step aside. There have been many who said that he should not step aside. And so, that has been very helpful to him. But if Biden were to step aside, the most likely replacement would be, you know, the first woman president, or the first woman, I guess, I don't know if she would take over immediately, but but Kamala Harris, who could become the first woman president, and a black woman and an Asian woman as well. So it seems like I don't really buy. Look, my preference is that you'd have some type of voter input, more open nomination process. We'll talk about that, right? But it seems like, do they really prefer Biden to a black vice president who is at this point in her life much more capable than he is, right?
Well, I think
80,
that,
81-year-old Biden's not more capable than Kamala Harris. I mean, no, he's not, right? He's
no,
not
he
capable of
absolutely isn't.
prosecuting the case against Trump. He's not capable of being uptime when you need a potential crisis. I mean, you can think Kamala Harris is a mediocre at best politician, which I do, and she might not be your cup of tea, but but it's just a bizarre argument that so I think if they said, okay, we might not have enough leverage to have this West Wing Aaron Sorkin fantasy convention that Nate Silver might like, right? Do you not have the leverage to say, let's agree that Kamala Harris is a less bad option, right? She is capable of actually prosecuting the case against Trump. You're not lying to the American public about her fitness for office. And you know what? She'll probably lose, but Biden's probably going to lose too. What's the world in which Biden wins that Harris doesn't win? I mean,
Yeah,
it's
no,
the world where Biden win involve worlds where the polling is so far off that we don't know anything to begin with, or where Trump goes to jail or something. And any Democrat can win in those conditions. Any halfway competent Democrat, maybe we're not going to get more than a halfway competent option, but it's just I don't know. I refuse to believe, I guess, that that people. I mean, look, we're in Nevada, not Nevada, right? Nevada.
Nevada is correct.
Uh,
And
and you see ads in Nevada because it's a swing state, which New York is not. I saw some Spanish language ad, for example, where they're Joe Biden is very competent. He has a steady hand, and he does not have a steady hand. I mean, literally, I'm not sure he has a steady hand anymore. I don't mean to diagnose him medically, but you can't project. Oh, we are the campaign that is just a steady hand, competence, no chaos anymore, right? That cat is out of the bag. It's too late for that. You're selling people on a lie, and it just, the honest thing to do is to say, we chose this woman to be vice president, and she has served as vice president for 3.5 years now. At any moment, she could become president. Joe Biden could have a heart attack. There could be some type of attack on wherever Joe Biden is located. We people elected Kamala Harris to be vice president, and clearly you're in a situation where she is more fit to be president than Biden over the next 4 years. And what's it say about her? Or what's it say about how cynical the decision was? Maybe you picked her in June 2020 because you're in a period, summer 2020, you're in a period where there's a lot of this racial reckoning, so-called, right? But she is a senator from California. She's been a district attorney, right? She is someone who I think is generally regarded as being very smart and competent. The problems were mostly the fact that politically she wasn't a very compelling candidate, although she might have some upside potential. But what's it say about Kamala Harris that none of these Democrats entrust her? I
yeah,
mean, if I were her, I'd be fuck these fucking people.
so would I, but I don't think what we're seeing is as much what it says about Kamala Harris. I think it's more what we're saying about delusion and doubling down and what's going on psychologically with the Democratic Party and with Biden himself. So I think there are a few different real fallacies happening here, and real issues. The first is that Democrats are saying, Biden is a good man. We can convince him to step down by these subtle hints, these subtle, he'll see the light. What they don't understand is that when you attack someone's core identity, right, who they are, how they see themselves, what their reason for being is, that does not work. And what ends up happening is you double down and you really do not see the light. And I think that that's even worse with Biden right now, because he is degrading a little bit when it comes to cognitive capacity. We all, see the world through rose-colored glasses, have this better than average effect where we think we're, better, et cetera, et cetera. But in the case of someone who is president, right, who has that hubris, who's been reinforced over and over and over, that's going to be completely doubled. wrote an article a number of years ago for the New Yorker called "I Don't Want to Be Right," and it's basically about how difficult it is to get people to change their minds when the essence of who they see themselves as is attacked. And so relying on Biden and trying to appeal to his good nature to step aside, that is not going to work. And we see that actually backfiring right now. We see Biden saying, you know, I'm not going to step aside, I'm going to fight. And it's obviously not helped that he has people around him like Hunter, like Joe Biden, who are telling him, oh no, this is great, this is wonderful. And then the flip side of that is that you have this party that is a little bit kind of, I don't know if diluted is the right term. It's a little strong, but it might be correct. So I think we've talked on the pod before, maybe not, about how I see kind of the Trump supporters as basically being cult followers, right? It doesn't matter what happens, they're in this cult, so they're going to rationalize everything away. No red flags are actually red flags, and instead they're going to kind of go through this cognitive dissonance reduction so that they end up saying, no, this is still the best candidate. This is wonderful. This is great. Like no matter what, we're voting for him. And I actually think we're seeing a little bit of that in the Democratic Party, where it's not a cult, but it's more like Stockholm syndrome-ish, where they're also rationalizing away the red flags. And I think that actually intersects with what you were talking about with the risk aversion factor, because they're scared, and they're scared of taking this kind of this gamble. They're scared of doing something unprecedented, and that is self-reinforcing. So you have that, and then you have the kind of the delusion of, no, everything's going to be okay. This isn't actually a red flag. He just had a bad day. And the more you rationalize, the easier it becomes to rationalize, and the more you actually start believing that this is reality. Because if in the immediate aftermath of the debates, you were like, holy shit, we're fucked, right? And then like the next day, you're like, oh, well, maybe it wasn't so bad. And then 2 days later, you're like, okay, really, it wasn't so bad. You know, you kind of start rewriting history. You start rewriting the way that you perceive it. And you end up in this place where you're pretty divorced from reality. And that is a really dangerous place to be. And I think that might be kind of where we are right now. And
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there are different metaphors you can use. I mean, shell shocked might be one of them. Most people, when they're under stress, they freeze up, right? They have a fight or flight reaction. But actually they just fear, right? It's kind of fear, freeze, fight, or flight. And a lot of people freeze. Um, I would like to know,
did
in
you
your
read my
opinion, Maria.
newsletter?
Maria, by the way, subscribe to both Maria and my newsletters. So let's say I commission you. I'm Barack Obama, right? And you're
Okay.
my PhD Columbia psychologist. And I say,
Okay.
I need to devise a plan to get Joe fucking Biden to quit. And I have a week to do it before we reach some point of no return. I can use any trick in the book as long as it's not illegal. Any psychological trick in the book. What is a plan to make Joe Biden think it's in his best interest to quit, or is it not a matter of, or is it a matter of playing pure hardball?
Well, I think that there can be two approaches to it. First, I think you do need to be completely straightforward with him and straightforward with the people around him, right? You need to sit Hunter and Jill down as well and be like, stop fucking around. Like this is bad, right? And get that out of the way. But then I think you need to be straightforward with him, and you need to do it in a way that does not attack who he is, but actually reinforces it, and says, you know, you want to go down in history as the great president who stopped Donald Trump. The only way to do that is by stepping aside. These are all the amazing things that you would be doing. This does not make you look weak. It's not because you're old. Of course, we know you're competent. Of course, we know what you're doing. The other people are idiots, though, and you need to understand political perception. You need to understand, you know, how people are reacting. They're not rational, but it doesn't matter because, you know, that's who we're dealing with. So you need to be the bigger man and do the right thing. And you're smart enough to do it. You're competent enough to do it. You know, you're brilliant. Use your brilliant mind to step aside and do the strategically correct thing to save the country from the brink of disaster. So you're doing several things, right? You're playing to his ego. You're not saying he's weak. You're not saying he's too old. You're not attacking him in ways that make him feel attacked. And instead, you're trying to say, okay, how do you cement your legacy? And honestly, I might even do something like pull the RBG card, and say, you know, let's let's look at RBG, someone who was this absolutely brilliant mind
It's
who
like
is
some
now remembered.
Charles Dickens film where the ghost of RBG comes from.
Exactly. The ghost of
Yeah.
RBG comes, I can dress up as RBG. You said pull out all the stops, right? We can get some CGI special effects. And I might be a little taller than she is, but we'll figure it out.
Right, that
And
actually worked
say,
because Biden said if the God Almighty came down, right? Like I'm thinking there's like a 20% chance that, like, if you actually stage that in a clever way, it would actually work. And by like I had some vision and like, I don't know,
well,
give
you
him
can,
some like give him
I
some
mean,
shroom gummies. It's probably illegal. I didn't mean to suggest that.
yeah, so
But
we're not
like
going to do anything illegal, but yeah, I mean, you could even pull that RBG card, the ghosts of justices past, and saying, I actually bet that if we got the ghost of RBG on the pod, she'd regret her decision after she saw what happened. She was a smart woman. She just let her ego get in the way, and I think that that's what's happening here. And you can compare. I mean, if you compare Biden, like. I think the key also is to find other good historical precedents of people who he admires and who he thinks, are strong leaders who did something like this, you can be like, you can be like, or you can be like RBG, right? Like you can do these things and it's not about you. The whole thing, right? We always talk about, you look at all these presidential addresses over, hundreds of years, and it's not about you, it's about the country, it's about the greater good. And so to try to kind of get to that and have him hear it. And the only way he's going to hear it is if he doesn't feel attacked and if he doesn't feel like you're disrespecting him, if he doesn't feel belittled, if he doesn't feel like you're talking to him like an old man, because he does not see himself that way. I think it's really important to project to him the way that he sees himself. He sees himself as still that young, capable senator who can do anything. In the debate, that became very clear because when he was asked, what do you say about the age complaints? He was like, well, I used to be the youngest. Everyone was complaining about my age. It's like, well, that doesn't answer the question, but that actually gives you a really, really interesting psychological lens into what's going on in his head. In his mind, he's still the youngest. He can still make it work. He just has off days. He is doing that exact same rationalization. And I think he truly, truly believes it. I do not think he thinks he's slipping. And he can rationalize away like one bad day, et cetera, et cetera. And if he actually has diminished cognitive capacity, then once again, it's going to be that much more difficult for him to see reality. So the way that the best con artists operate is to sell people the vision of the world that they already believe is true. And so here I'm suggesting we use the persuasion tactics of con artists to try to gently persuade Biden to do what's best and make him think that it's his own idea. That's the other thing that they do, right? Instead of saying like, give
I,
me your money, they make me say, Nate, I think you really want to give me your money. And you're like, hey, you know what, Maria, I really want to give you my money. And so I think that's what we need to do with Biden so that he ends up thinking himself, you know what, maybe I do want to step down. Maybe this is really for the best of everything. And maybe this is how I cement my legacy as the great man that I know that I am. What do we think?
what's challenging is that you have two kind of games in the sense of things that game theory might apply to going on at once. Um, on the one hand, you have this private tactic that you're talking about, right? And the senators, as opposed to the representatives, are mostly saying things like, well, I was troubled, the Susan Collins, if you're a politics
Right.
fan. I was troubled by what I saw in the debate, and I've gone back to my constituents to see what they think, but I wouldn't want to make a decision on behalf of Joe Biden, the greatest man who ever lived. It's like that kind of shit. Like
Nate,
that
you
actually
should you
seems to
should
make
become a voice actor.
okay, thank you, Maria. I think that's kind of maybe the right play in terms of the psychology of it, right? However, you also have this thing where all these Democrats think Joe Biden should quit, and they have a collective action problem
Yep.
and kind of a preference cascade problem where people are acting differently than what they really think. You know, and so what Biden did on Monday is they kind of rounded up all of the people I think they could who would go on record for whatever selfish or unselfish reason or naive or not naive reason. Um, AOC and all these Democrats kind of went on record and said, of course he has to be our nominee. It's actually not actually that many as a share of the caucus, but like, you know, but they're not worried about the preference cascade game. They're coming out and saying what they actually think, or maybe actually they're saying things that they don't actually believe, but that they don't bear as much of a personal cost, or at least they don't think so, or the president's calling in favors or whatever else. So he made this aggressive move to like reverse this momentum and staunch the bleeding. For how long? I don't know. I mean, the fundamental problem is that he doesn't have the goods, right? He doesn't have the
No.
goods to run a normal campaign, and his slim chances, which aren't zero, but slim, rest on, something about the information environment that we don't understand, or something that hasn't happened yet, some other dilemma that makes Trump, even though nothing seems to change Trump's numbers, on principle, you could
Yeah.
imagine, I'm not sure what
No,
that would.
I can't imagine anything on principle. But I actually thought about one other thing that is happening right now that we've talked about before in a past episode that can be a data point for people to use with Biden and with convincing him that sometimes these gambles pay off. Macron and France. Like, holy shit, what happened in the second round of elections when people thought the National Front was going to sweep it and might become, the majority. That didn't happen, right? His gamble kind of, we were a little
Maybe.
bit wrong. It kind of paid off. I mean, we'll see, right? We'll see what happens. But the country really came together to stop this threat, and he did something completely unprecedented. We thought that it was totally insane, and now we see that, oh wait, wow, like Le Pen
But
did not.
it's not just because the country actually, Le Pen got like 39% of the vote,
Yeah,
by far the largest
absolutely,
share,
but
right?
the
However,
disaster that they was predicted.
the adults in the room acted like adults, and they said,
Yes.
what happened is you had very high turnout in all these constituencies. So like 3 candidates qualify for the ballot. You'd often have a right-wing candidate, a centrist, and a left-wing candidate. And the left and the center agree that in every constituency where one of us finished in third place, right? If it's first two, we'll battle it out, right? But
Yeah.
like if one
They
finished in
dropped
third,
out. It was
they'll drop out.
amazing. Yeah. And it worked. The
That's
coordination actually worked. They did it. They had the third
And
person
by the
drop
way, it
out.
worked in 2020 in an ironic way when Democrats said, we are in the middle of an impending pandemic and we don't want a really left-wing nominee like Bernie. And you can say that was the wrong decision or unfair to Bernie, but they did get Biden elected, and they were able to like close down that primary pretty quickly. And so like, the notion that Biden is like running some anti-elite campaign, first of all, he calls into like fucking like Morning Joe, the like breakfast cereal of like the most elite political elites in the country, right? To complain about how, I mean, it's very Trumpian or Nixonian. It's Trumpian. I mean, it's not like I'm not playing around with this. I'm being fucking both sides here. I think Joe Biden has acted more and more like Richard Nixon and Donald Trump in recent days. But like, he was appointed to positions by decisions made by elites. He finished in 8th place in the 2008 Democratic primary or something, and Barack Obama appointed him as his vice president, right? In 2020, there was an intervention on his behalf. I think he might have eventually won, maybe anyway. It was probably pretty close between him and Bernie and other people, but there was an intervention by all these party elites to like maximize his chances as much as possible. So who the fuck is he to think that he didn't earn this for being like the most impressive orator in America or the smartest person, right? I mean, if we're being fucking honest, like of the 46, how many percent is it? 46? I'm losing my train of thought. Yeah.
Yes.
In terms of like what he's accomplished outside of politics, he's like not in the upper half of like.
No, but if you say this to him, like in his mind, he will have rewritten history, right? Like that's the way that self-serving bias works, especially when you're in that position of power, and you get that reinforced. He does not remember that it wasn't him. He does not remember that he finished 8th. I mean, obviously he remembers, but he has already rationalized it away as I was always the best choice. I was going to win regardless. But what the Democrats need to remember is they made it happen, right? So let's forget Biden. Like he's not gonna, he's gonna say like I made it happen. But what the party needs to understand is that collective action is actually possible. And we just saw it in France where that coordination worked. And the fact that the candidates worked together, that they put aside their egos, that they stepped aside, that they did what was right. And that, as you said, they behaved like adults. Why can't our country behave like adults? They're behaving like fucking children. Like it's really like both parties. And what you said, the reason that I started saying that some of the things I was saying about con artists and cults, et cetera, and Trump, I'm now applying to the Democrats, that is because I kind of agree with you that Biden is acting in those ways more right now than he ever has in the past. And of course, all politicians have a little bit of kind of that bent to them because you have to convince people to do things all the time. But he now is becoming increasingly divorced from reality and from what's going on. And as soon as your decisions become driven by ego as opposed to, by what you should be doing as a politician in the country, et cetera, that's when things start to go wrong. But as I said, let's call on the Democratic Party to actually remember who got him there, and that they are capable of doing big things like this, and that we see evidence that this works, and it's worked in other countries and it's worked in our country. And why not try it again? Because yeah, it might not work, but what we're doing right now sure as hell ain't working.
Yeah, look, if he is not able to process this, then maybe we should invoke the 25th Amendment. I mean, it's kind of like, I don't know, like the people around Biden, with them, would you play hardball, or is that still a bad idea? Because for me, I'd be like, first of all, every fucking piece of dirt that we have on you is going to come out unless he quits in a week, right?
Okay, so the people around Biden are different from Biden. With them, I would play hardball. With Biden, I wouldn't. I would start off with the strategy that I already outlined. The people around Biden, that's totally different. Yeah, with them, you absolutely play hardball, and this is where you put your gloves on and you say, okay, or you take your gloves off, right? What's the metaphor we want? You take your gloves off and you just go down and dirty, and you do what you need to do to get them to act and to actually light a fire under their asses so that they do what needs to be done for the good of the country. Because right now, they've been left alone, and that's not working. Whatever's happening right now is not working.
I do wonder if you're some senior Biden staffer, right? What if you turn out to be the whistleblower and you write an op-ed for the New York Times, and go on all the TV shows, come on this podcast,
Yes.
and say, Biden is not fit to be president. We've been propping, do it in a much more diplomatic way. Obviously, Biden was a great man, right? But as time has evolved, he has had more and more challenges with day-to-day tasks, and I cannot, in good conscience, not convey this to the American people anymore, right? And I think he should step aside and let his extremely talented elected vice president Kamala Harris be the nominee instead, right? First of all, if your cards play right, you might look like a genius for doing that. Although there is one other problem, which is that, like, if let's say Kamala Harris has like I'm going to give you, if you've listened this far in, I'm going to give you some numbers, right? Let's say she has a 35 or 40% chance to win, and Biden has a 20% chance to win if he's forced to stay in, right? I think it might be high, but I'm referring
Nate,
to our
are these
model, which
numbers?
is 29.
Yeah, I was going to say, are these numbers based on your model right now?
The model says 29%, but there's one
Okay.
big problem with that, which is the model assumes that, like, Joe Biden is capable of running the type of campaign that feeds the data in the model, right? If you took Joe Biden right now in a whole and replaced him with an average Democrat, John Kerry, maybe Joe Biden 2020, who was notably a better performer, right?
Mhm.
If you put like an average Democrat in his shoes, Hubert H. Humphrey or something, then I think 29% is the most recent reading, might be reasonable. However, I don't think he's capable of running a normal campaign at all. He hasn't been so far. Every media cycle has been distracted. It was going to turn into a distraction about like his age and performance and things like that. There's another debate coming up. So like, I think the chances might be if I'm kind of, I mean, my gut is the chances are zero, right? Now, I don't weigh my gut that heavily. But my gut is like, there's just no fucking way that America's going to elect this guy for another 4 years. Just fundamentally untenable. And he's already behind now. He's falling further behind. So if I average 29% and zero, then you get in the 15% range or whatever, right? A kind of balancing head and model. And the reason why, in this case, I think it's important not to go pure model is that there's not a precedented circumstance for this, right? There's not a circumstance where like the candidate is so obviously not ready to run a normal campaign anymore. And I think also, like, in a more technical matter, like, we still haven't had that much high quality state polling since the debate.
Mhm.
The model's been a little bit conservative about that. So I bet on the model being 25%. And anyway, that's where I get to like 15 or 20%. I think it's not zero, but like in Harris, I think might be double that roughly. She's
Which
still
is
below
huge, by the
50%.
way. Double
No, for
is
sure.
even
Yeah.
if we're below 50%, double Biden is huge.
We
And
picked up a
so
lot of outs, Marie, on the turn. Picked up a lot of outs. Our hand looked bad,
exactly,
but picked up like a straight flush draw on the turn. Not too
exactly. Now
bad,
now we have a combo draw.
Combo
And
draw. Maybe even hitting a pair.
yeah,
Maybe we hit that queen in the combo draw. Maybe that would be good. You never know.
absolutely.
Um, yeah.
Absolutely. And so I think that it seems to me, last time we were talking about different options, I think that we agree that Kamala is kind of the best option, given where we are, just in terms of the fact that, she has all of the machinery in place, she has all of the funds in place, she gets to use the however many, like $91 million.
I don't want the machinery. The best part of comedy would be that you get rid of these fucking incompetent Biden
Yes,
staffers, right?
absolutely. But she gets to use the money that has been raised for the Biden Harris ticket. She gets to use kind of she is already someone who doesn't need to start from not zero, but from a much lower point. And right now, getting to that double Biden's numbers seems to be a victory. And I
But
think
like,
we
let's say
should
you
take
advocate for
every
Kamala,
edge, right? Take every edge you can.
but let's say that Kamala gets nominated and the
Mhm.
60% chance roughly that she loses. That's the one that plays out in our world. Um, I guess you look bad then, right? Because then you're like, well, Joe, if only Joe Biden had stayed in.
No, I don't
I mean,
think you look.
this is where like this. I think people are not willing to admit the untenability of the situation. Um, that like, I mean, Biden again. Uh, the things that would allow him to win are things that would allow any Democrat
Anyone to
to
win.
win,
Yep.
and that require yeah. It's
No, and
not. I mean,
go
the
ahead.
term we use in baseball is replacement level, meaning that like
Hmm.
a guy you're indifferent toward, less than indifferent toward Biden. I mean, look. I wrote this in the New York Times last week. If you compare Democrats polling in Senate races to Biden, they are doing better in literally every single poll.
Yeah.
Literally every single poll in a state that's both a swing state. They're tied in one, excuse me, out of like 50 polls in states that are both swing states in the presidential race and the presidency. Um, Democrats are actually doing pretty fucking well down the ballot. It's Biden that's the problem. The reason it's a problem is because he's 81 years old and is in rapid decline, I think.
Yeah.
And that's obvious to anyone with a fucking brain. And like it just you can't sell that much of a shit sandwich to voters. It's not
Yeah.
something you can compartmentalize because it gets into the very way that he speaks, the very way that he conducts the business of the White House. It's not like it's not like he screwed some intern and you can put that out of your mind, right?
No,
It's fundamentally
this
a
is the
performance
person
based thing.
making our national security decisions, right? This is the person who is reacting in times of crisis. This is the person who we turn to for the major executive decisions that matter. And you need someone with very clear executive making capacity, which I think right now he lacks. Now, of course, I'm just gonna say this goes without saying because a lot of people are like the whataboutism with, well, what about Trump? Yeah, of course, like Trump lacks it too. Trump should step aside, blah, blah, blah. That ain't happening. So like let's just not let's not worry about that to the people listening right now, being like, well, what about? No, not what about like Trump is awful. He can't think clearly. He's too old. He has cognitive problems. We don't want him with the nuclear codes. But he is not stepping aside. So that's just going to, I just want to like get that out of the way so that
Right. And
people,
look, if you detect like a little peak in my tone and Maria's tone today, I mean, there's two things. Like, one, I'm just offended by strategic stupidity in high stakes
yeah,
situations, right? Although,
absolutely.
to be fair, we don't know what individual motives are, and that gets complicated.
Yeah,
But also, like, I feel angry as a voter that I am not offered an acceptable alternative. I said last week I'm not going to vote.
absolutely.
I'm not going to vote for Biden. I'm not in a swing
Um,
state. I
I
don't
of
know what
course am
anyone is.
because I'm in Nevada,
Yeah,
and
I
he's come. But I hope that I don't have to. Right? I really, really hope that I'll be voting for Harris or for whoever replaces him. I truly hope that because of course I will vote for Biden, but I do it kind of with a heavy heart because I don't want Trump to win.
no, but
And
there is one party now that has some capability of nominating somebody who is an
yep,
acceptable American president for the next four
and that's the
years, right? And
Democrats.
that's the
Yep.
Democrats. Could be
So
the
so
first
let's
one.
do it. Get Democrats, get your shit together,
Yeah,
please.
have
Have
some
some.
courage and think more than Look, the last thing I'll say, I know we've been going along, and we'll do a little bit of poker to close out, right? There's a good chance this is only going to get worse for Biden. What if he flubs the second debate, which is in, what is it, mid-September? Um, then you get in issues where, I mean, the DNC has the right to replace the candidate, right? But then you get into issues where our ballots being printed up, you're going to have a ton of litigation, basically, if you have to replace Biden then. And then it looks like really desperate, right?
Yeah.
Then it's like Biden can't kind of make this pretense. By the way, he probably has enough wrong with him that, like, actually go to a fucking doctor, Joe Biden. And then, like, I'm sure one of the many things that's wrong with you at age 81 can be a good excuse for why you're not running for president again, and kind of make the decision that way. But like, that would be Armageddon for Democrats if you have another debate in September, like you had this one. Like, and why wouldn't that happen?
Why wouldn't
Isn't that
that?
the
I was
base?
going to say, why? What other than wishful thinking would would say that the Biden in September is going to perform any better? If anything, I would say he's going to perform worse, because there's also going to be performance anxiety, because now he knows that he really did not do well today, and so the pressure is going to be even higher, and that is not good, right? This is not a good situation. I know we just keep like saying the same thing in different ways over and over and over, but it's important to say it in different ways, because maybe one of these ways will finally will finally get through, so that people understand that there really is a crisis. You really do need to act. And I think Biden would go down in history as someone who made, a courageous, wonderful decision if he steps down now. But as you've told me, when we've spoken in private, if his hand is forced, in September or October, that looks very different. And
Yeah.
suddenly it's a very different narrative. It's a narrative that's much more difficult to control. The odds of winning go down. And it looks like, okay, we fucked up. Like, we were incompetent. We didn't do this well. And now we have to do this. We're pulling the plug because there's no other choice. And so the optics of it look very different. And I think that's actually, going back to your earlier question, that's also something that you can kind of tell Biden in the sense that, like, look, here are the various scenarios. And in this one, you look like a hero. And in this one, you look like a villain. And there's no third scenario.
Yeah, to say we'll go nuclear if we have to, right? So actually, you don't really have a choice. I mean, you know, and we can talk about how likely it is to actually invoke the 25th Amendment. Although in game theory, a nuclear threat that has even a probabilistic chance of succeeding can still have an important deterrent
Absolutely.
effects, right?
It really changes the payoff matrix.
So to say, Joe Biden, you're not going to be the nominee, and we can do this the easy way or the hard way, but to convey that gently, it's a very hard message to strike. I'll grant you that. Maria, I think I need something relaxing to talk about, like high stakes poker tournaments instead.
We are in the middle of the largest main event in World Series of Poker history, Nate. So records were broken. 10,112, something like that, people. An insane number of people are out here in Vegas, going for that $10 million first prize.
So I'm of the roughly, what is it, like 6,500 of the 10,112 that are no longer in the tournament. You are in the 4,000 or something that are. Tell me about how it's gone for you so far.
So far, so we're about to start day 3. So this means that we're not in the money yet. So there's still quite a ways to go until then. So far, the tournament has been very up and down for me, but I've not been running well. So Nate, I'm keeping track of our prop bet. And yesterday I actually lost every single all in except for one tiny one. So I would get it, and I was an overwhelming favorite. I got 2 outed 3 times. My table thought this was very, very amusing, but I kept building back, and being able to survive. And honestly, that's the key. So right now, I'm going to have about 50 big blinds heading into day 3, which is totally fine, right? It's solid. It's not huge. I'm not one of the big stacks, but I'm not one of the micro stacks. And what's really, really important to remember in an event like this, which lasts over many days, is survival matters, right? It's one of these things where even if you don't have a huge chip stack, as long as you have some chips and as long as you pick your spots, then you're in it. And of course, this is poker, so anything can happen. I've successfully avoided those horrible cooler situations where I would have been knocked out, and they did happen. I had a case where there was a set over set situation. I did have a couple of moments where I could have been knocked out, and I took the more conservative line, and it served me well. And so I'm proud of not of lasting through those. But who knows? As you get shallower, when I have 200 big blinds, it's much easier to avoid those. It's much easier to find the fold. When you have 50 and you have, a set, when you're in a situation like that,
It's
at some point you can't fold.
it's a tricky tournament because on the one hand, there are inclinations to be risk averse yourself. On the other hand, everyone else thinks the same way. So it can kind of devolve into a game of chicken a little bit. I was never getting very much going as far as like hitting hands, right? So most of the ups and downs involve different types of bluffs. I tried to run some successfully, some not. But you can run pretty big bluffs in the main event. People don't want to lose all their chips and get knocked out. Yeah, but yeah, I don't have a great narrative. I mean, I was kind of just, remaining very patient.
Mhm.
Because you can just like, oh, I lost like 10 pots in a row. And because you have so many chips, then like it's not affecting you all that much. But at some point, kind of late on day two, if you've ever played the event, that's when the blinds start to creep up enough. It goes from 1,000 big blind to 1,500 and then 2,000 in two levels, right? That's
Yep.
a doubling in two levels. And that's where a lot of people like me start to get knocked out or in a situation where there is actually a cost to being patient, right? Where
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, I went, I don't know if I want to get too technical about the terms, right? But like I went all in with the okay hand because I thought I had a lot of fold equity. I've been playing very tight. I thought I had a good image. But you can have a good image, and if the opponent has kings, then it doesn't matter how
Sometimes you
good your
just run
image is.
into it.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's a good spot. You made the right decision and they just have it. And those situations are going to happen. And that doesn't mean you made the wrong decision. Once again, this is to go back to what we've talked about a lot and to tie this a little bit back to politics. The process is what matters, and you can't be, outcome oriented. If you made the right decision for the right reasons, even if you ended up losing, you can't be mad at yourself. So, if you ran the right bluff, went all in with the right hand, picked the right spot, and they just happened to have it, so be it. But at least that you did everything possible to put yourself in a situation to win. And I think that everyone would do well to remember that lesson and to not be like, but what happens if I lose? I can't. You cannot have that sort of risk averse thinking going in. That said, I'm going to, my plan for today is to just play well, try to pick good spots, and hope for the best, because you do need to run well in these tournaments. And patience is important, and not panicking is really, really important, because a lot of people, when they start, when their chips start going down, they start making decisions they shouldn't. They start taking risks they shouldn't to try to build back up. And that's not a good mindset. So I will try
And
to
the
be zen going into the day.
and the main event, I mean, benefits for people who have made like a deep run before, I think. I mean, you see one thing that was good, I made this deep run last year, which will not be repeated now, obviously. But like you get that monkey off your back, and I felt loose in what I think you'd mostly rather be looser than tighter when you're playing
Mhm.
poker. I don't mean in terms of like how you construct your ranges, right? That's a different type of loose or tight.
Yep.
I mean, in terms of your vibe and your mood, I I don't think there's any harm from looking at the main event as quote just another poker tournament, right? I think that's more
Yep.
good than harmful. Now that might mean that like now strategically there are differences that don't apply to any other tournament, right? And there are things like it's more worth it to get your rest and your fitness and eat well instead of the cheap burger or whatever, right? On the break, right? The expected value difference is higher. But like, people who have success in the main tend to have repeated success because they've been there before and they don't have anything to prove. And like I think that's usually helpful in a tournament where patience is very rewarded.
Yep, absolutely. So here's hoping that I will be rewarded today. I will do my best, but whatever happens, I just hope that I'm happy with my decisions at the end of the day.
Um, Maria, you want to wrap it up? I mean, I think I think,
Yeah,
you know, a lot of politics, a little bit of poker, but trust me, listeners, it'll be the reverse of that in some episodes in the future.
that's absolutely right.
Yeah.
And we got it a little bit out of our systems, even though we can't promise that we will not get it back into our systems for the weeks to come, because this is a fraught time. But for now,
What
I'm going
about
to
a
switch
poker?
my
What about
mind.
a poker game?
Uh-huh.
It's like us and Kamala Harris against Joe Biden, Hunter Biden, who might be a good player, and Jill Biden.
Let's do it.
It'll be
Okay,
like a
guys,
game
we
of
challenge you.
gold. I absolutely will do this. Yeah. And whoever
As will I.
wins, right? Yeah.
Let's do it. Let's play for roles, as they
Hunter
say.
Biden might be Hunter Biden's got some good bluffing skills, right? That actually, that creates some risk.
It does. But what would a game be without risk?
Exactly.
And so with that, I am going to go and prepare to play day 3 of the main.
I'm gonna go and enter some other event where I'm sad. I'm sad and have to
Good luck.
sad with the other losers in the loser bracket.
Good luck. Good luck,
Thank
Nate.
you
You
very
are
much.
my favorite loser.
Thank you.